Secure, contain, protect. This is the mantra of an organization created to do one thing: contain anomalies. Be it safe but odd occurrences, all the way up to world-ending creatures. The SCP Foundation has a rich history of anomalous events and an even richer history of anomalous creatures. None quite strike the fear in me as one that can only be described as a body horror teetering on eldritch. Tonight, we dive into a story that is an amalgamation of flesh and death. Tonight we cover SCP-610, The Flesh That Hates. First, let's start with the description of SCP-610 from the Wiki. Initial reports of SCP-610 come direct from the Russian government, through undisclosable channels. These reports consisted primarily of disappearances of farmers in the region and were not considered until the local police, followed by the regional police, and finally a government dispatched agent all failed to report in within a 72-hour period. A small military contingent was dispatched to the area and quickly withdrew, at which point the Foundation was contacted to investigate. The area SCP-610 infects is close to Lake Baikal in southern Siberia. Areas of known infection are marked on a map provided to us here. Containment perimeters are marked in blue surrounding these infection areas, and as of present, no further locations have been identified. Incursions into the perimeter must be reported prior to conducting, confirmed during exploration, and debriefed on immediately following return. SCP-610 appears to be a contagious skin disease at first, with symptoms including rash, itching, and increased skin sensitivity. Within 3 hours, the disease will cause blemishes, resembling heavy scar tissue, to form in the chest and arm areas, spreading to the legs and back within an additional hour, consuming the victim completely within 5 hours. Exposure to higher temperatures vastly decreases the time for the contagion to spread, and complete infections have been recorded occurring in as little as 5 minutes. After the completion of the infection occurs, the victim's life functions will cease for approximately 3 minutes, after which they will restart at 2 to 3 times the activity rate of a normal human. Following this, the scar tissue on the victims will start to move on its own accord and grow at a rapid rate. Normal human features start to disappear at this point under the infection, and the path of mutation appears to be largely random. Subjects observed in this stage of infection have been recorded as growing 3 or more limbs of a type such as arms or legs. The head may become misshapen and elongate or widen out, and parts of the subject may split open from which additional branches of flesh will grow. The duration of this stage of infection is unknown, and not all subjects appear to progress to the later stage. Under unknown conditions, an infected individual will cease moving and place itself in a location it deems suitable where it roots itself. The fleshy growth on the victim will then begin to spread itself across all surrounding objects and consume them. Such objects do not spread the infection as living creatures do, however, and the effect of prolonged contact with these objects is recorded later in this document. It is assumed this behavior is to create an area hospitable to continued growth of the other infected. Observation of life infected by SCP-610 by staff is impossible. Those infected with the disease immediately seek out aid as natural human impulse, resulting in unintended infections. Those infected past the scar tissue phase actively and aggressively attempt to infect anyone approaching them within an undefined area. It has been established that should an infected be capable of sight and observe an uninfected, it will proceed toward them. If the infected has lost the ability of sight, a range approximately 30 meters is considered safe. Observation of SCP-610 infected settlements has been established using artificial methods such as remote robots. The data returned from these observations, coupled with the openly aggressive nature of the infected to attempt to spread SCP-610, has resulted in the Keter classification. However, as long as nothing is allowed to enter or leave the infected areas, it is considered a neutralized threat. Of concern are the cavernous areas beneath the infected settlements that were discovered during the exploration, and attempts to get research personnel into these areas are underway. From this description of 610, we can gather a few things. One is that it is an infection similar to the many zombie varieties that exist in pop culture. Unlike those depictions, 610 doesn't seem to want to eat living humans like zombies would. It acts more like a parasite, wanting to spread to as many people as it can. A piece that I skipped over states how the SCP Foundation is containing this specific anomaly. Working along with the Russian government, they've decided that they can't contain it, but instead look to isolate the area and monitor it heavily. They have an established perimeter around the village and watch for any infected personnel that might try to leave. If they are spotted, they are to be killed at range and then incinerated, as it's the only way to fully remove the infection. The perimeter also acts as a way of keeping people out. They do this by claiming the village as a military exercise area. If any person, SCP personnel or otherwise, is to become infected, they are to be exterminated on site. It can only take a few hours for an entire area to become overrun with 610's contagion. The infected cannot be cured or even monitored in most cases, and so need to be killed as there's no way of saving them. The easiest way to become infected is through physical contact with an individual who is infected. These are the infections that only take a few hours to fully mutate a person. There have been infections from particles retrieved from 610 infected areas. These were usually left on drones that monitored the areas. These particles would take days to show symptoms on a person if they showed at all, unless they came in contact with the lungs or liver, in which case they moved rapidly. SCP-610 has a series of field logs that explore the environments where the SCPs have manifested and spread over time. There are a total of 6, but only 5 of them are available to us. The final one is considered of the highest level of clearance and is redacted for now. The first of these documents is SCP-610-L1. In it, a rover named Herbie is sent in to monitor the infected. The rover is remote controlled and has a video camera attached that sends a live feed back to researchers. This is the only way to be able to see inside the houses in the infected zone. Herbie is sent to the town and immediately records the homes. Many of them are burnt from an apparent fire that has long since been extinguished. There are several areas covered in heavy contamination. The area is being heavily assimilated by 610. In total, Herbie recorded a population of 79 infected. There are both immobile and mobile infected included in that number. The number of mobile versus immobile is not known as of this report. Herbie was sent into one of the intact homes following one of the mobile infected. Here's where a majority of the report takes place. The main infected being recorded, called Alpha, proceeds into the home and ignores that Herbie is following him. He then proceeds to walk around a table in the home where 2 infected are seated and one lurks under the table. Alpha stops at each of the infected organisms and acknowledges them, save for the one under the table. This is done 3 times in total, each time it laps around the table. Finally, it stops at a bedridden infected and starts to mercilessly punch it. A piercing sound erupts from the punched infected before a cloud of unknown substance bursts up into the air around Alpha. It stands in the substance cloud before beginning to circle the table again. Another unknown life form on the table begins to jerk violently, almost as if it's having a seizure. Alpha takes the plates on the table and places them down as tendrils extend from its face. The tendrils break off onto each plate, almost as if they were setting the table. A moment later, Alpha would leave, and then 6 to 7 other infected would shamble in and surround the table. They each looked like they were having trouble moving. They soon began to take turns eating Alpha's flesh from the plates. Some ate them normally through mouths, while others ate from their gaping chest cavities. Later, Herbie leaves the home and sees Alpha with its tangled tendrils outstretched towards another similar-looking infected. The two part ways, and Herbie continues exploring the village. It comes across the remains of a store. Inside it finds the upper half of a man's body covering a cellar. This man doesn't look to be suffering from advanced infection and is wearing Russian military garb. The man isn't moving except for his eyes, which follow Herbie as it leaves to explore the storeroom. In the room is a large pile of bodies with no faces visible from the way the bodies are stacked. Atop the pile is the upper half of an infected who is fused to the pile. It is flailing around wildly as if in pain. Every 10 seconds or so, a cloud of spores bursts from the upper half of the infected's body. Herbie leaves the building and finds a series of immobile infected surrounding the well at the center of the village. They are interlinked by their arms, and all are staring at the well. All arms are linked save for one infected who has their arms at their side. Herbie passes by, heading towards Town Hall, before one of the infected reaches out and grabs it. It is swung around to face the infected. The face is almost normal compared to the body, which is horribly bloated. The face looks to be that of a young girl, maybe 10 to 12 years old. The face then explodes open into flaps and absorbs Herbie. The feed cuts off here. This isn't where it ends though, as the feed would return 5 hours later. It showed the well up close with phlegm or some other substance covering the lens. When the phlegm fell off, it was almost a perfect image, but the phlegm would fall consistently. Herbie could not be remotely controlled by this point. The feed was eventually cut and Herbie was lost. All connections to Herbie were ordered to be erased. So in this first look into the infected world of SCP-610, we see some sort of body horror society. They're eating each other, fusing together, and even killing one another. A lot of what is happening is up for interpretation, but also paints this SCP as something more than just a zombie parasite trying to survive. The most interesting part to me is the upper half of a non-infected body being kept at the store. Only its eyes moved. So what is the purpose of this singular person? We would get a possible answer later, but it isn't quite clear if it is or not. The last bit with the rover basically being eaten and assimilated into the mass of flesh was interesting. It shows that they have some intelligence perhaps. They wanted the researchers to see a bit, but they also wanted to focus to be on the well, or away from the town hall. From here we move into SCP-610-L2. In this report, it is noted that quite a few Class D personnel were infected during the initial stages of setting up the perimeter, either from the infected humans running at them, or from nearby wildlife doing the same. These personnel were most likely killed on site and burned, but a few were kept in a cold storage, so that they could slow down the infection enough to send them into certain sites in the infected zone. They would take 3 of these Class D personnel named DI-1, DI-2, and DI-3 and send them into Site C, which is a different area from where they sent Herbie. They were given recording equipment, gasoline, flares, food rations, and a 9mm pistol each. With that, they were sent to the site. The first thing that they noticed was the amount of immobile infected there. All the infected seen thus far at this site were immobile, though there were these odd shapes surrounding the entirety of the site. They looked like pylons made from 3 or 4 infected bodies put together. They had mouths and other orifices all around them as if acting like heat vents, though there was no idea where the heat was coming from. At the sight of these, DI-2 started to rapidly change. He fell to the ground and was shot by one of the other 2. His body continued to morph even though he was dead, until the ground opened up and tendrils shot out to grab the body before closing. This happened in a matter of seconds. DI-1 and DI-3 leave quickly and head for the center of town. Here they find a strange ball-shaped anomaly suspended in the air by pillars formed from 610 flesh. Inside the ball looks to be human body parts, faces, and animals like bears and deer. It is an amalgamation of flesh and viscera. DI-3 douses the sphere in gasoline, deciding that if anything needed to be burned, this was it. He stood back and launched a flare to ignite the mass. As it ignited, a loud sound as if a monster was roaring can be heard coming from somewhere far from Site C. An explosion happens at Site A before the circular object at Site C also explodes. It knocks back both DI-1 and DI-3, killing the latter instantly. DI-1 records from his camera for a while, explaining that he was not hurt in the explosion. As he's looking around, something grabs and pulls him away from the center of Site C. A humanoid figure can be seen moving through the air before something steps on the video equipment, cutting its feed. This is showing an advanced form of life. SCP-610 is creating a habitat or harvesting bodies. As far as we've seen, the reason is unknown. It could be to create more infected rather than needing hosts, or it could be to create a food source. For now we have no way of knowing, so we look to L4. This field log starts exactly where the last one ended, with the explosion at Site A. Here the infected start to act weird. The ones that are immobile begin to shrivel up and die. The same thing happens to the material that has been growing on inorganic objects. The mobile infected all ran to the biggest house in town before a giant sinkhole opened up and sank the house. Researchers were then sent to examine the remains of the dead infected, as well as the hull. They were in full hazardous material suits so they could explore without fear of contracting the infection. The team had scientists as well as guards. After 2 hours of picking up samples and monitoring the area, a magnitude 2.5 to 3 earthquake occurred at the site. This sent a wave of spores out of the hole in the ground. As the personnel were all in their suits, they were not infected, but shortly after, a new SCP-610 variant was seen. A small flying infected soon descended upon the personnel. They would attack them by opening up their faces vertically to grab at them. They would then fly them over the hole and attempt to drop them in. Only 2 personnel, both scientists, were killed in the raid as the guns proved to be lethal against the infected. One scientist was compromised in the attack from a stray bullet. His suit was ripped and the infection acted quickly. He was just as quickly terminated, as the infection moved quicker than they expected. Later, a giant engorged human-like head was seen inside the hole. It emerged before causing a magnitude 7 earthquake. The video cuts out after this, and no members of the research team at Site A were ever seen again. All personnel and equipment were considered lost. This next ground report shows us 2 things. 1, that there is definitely something moving underground, and 2, that 610 is evolving or adapting. It was specifically trying to throw the bodies into that hole, probably to feed itself. This is one of the more important ground logs, but we'll need to keep reading as there's 2 more. L4 takes us inside of the tunnel that was created at Site A. The Foundation set up a drone to travel inside of the tunnel and capture as much footage as it could. The drone was loaded up with a camera that linked directly to the perimeter site and also had a gun attachment. The drone is released and makes its way to Site A. It enters the tunnel and immediately records the walls, which do not look like they were dug over time, but instead created in one motion. The walls also have splatters of 610 flesh that look dormant rather than dead like the flesh up at the site. At the bottom, the drone finds a tunnel that is absolutely covered in 610 flesh that looks active. The tunnel is big enough for it to explore, and it does so. There's some flowing groundwater which the drone drops a tracker in. The tracker makes its way out, and the sample shows up clean for SCP-610 infection. Eventually, the drone makes its way to another opening at the end of the tunnel. It rises nearly 300 meters to another village. It looks similar to Site B's village, but it is not. Some of the houses look to be made almost entirely of 610 flesh. Capturing as much as was valuable, the drone heads back into the tunnels. The drone travels for a little while before a loud scream is heard, and the head from before is seen traveling quickly in the tunnel. The drone shoots its guns, but the wounds heal nearly instantly. It can't escape the face, so it just records its features. It looks less like a human head now, as it lacks the actual features. It has 2 empty eye sockets created from 610 flesh, a stump for a nose, and most importantly, an open mouth. The drone's connection is severed as it is eaten by the monstrously bloated head. This wasn't the last they'd seen from the feed though. It would return momentarily hours later with a feed that shows an unknown place filled with shambling humanoid shapes. More 610 infected than had been previously observed. The camera feed shuts off shortly after. After how poorly this excursion ended, you'd assume that the Foundation would call it quits on exploring the tunnels. It wasn't though, as the team at the perimeter site were given full permission to send a manned assault team into the tunnels. This was done shortly after the drone was taken offline. A total of 5 teams were sent in with enough equipment to set up ground sites for future exploration if needed. 3 of those teams were assault teams, and 2 were there for research. Most of the beginning of L5 is spent explaining how they set up base camps and what equipment they brought. The real meat of the story, pardon my pun, is when they start exploring one of the tunnels. There were a total of 3 tunnels, with 1 being blocked off. Some of the teams were left behind to examine the caverns near the base camp, while 3 were sent down an unexplored cavern. It wasn't until 20 kilometers in that a buggy was ordered by the leader of the assault teams. They established a base camp inside the cavern while they waited for the buggy. The buggy traveled without issue, but as soon as it arrived, the teams were attacked by 610 entities. They emerged from the walls almost like they were being created, and moved without sound on the assault teams. During the assault, an undisclosed number of members were lost down the water currents. Communication with these members was lost and they were assumed dead. The team recouped and continued down the tunnel with the buggy. They would be attacked again, but were able to fend off these attackers as well. But they did notice that these 610 entities were fewer, but much larger this time. The teams emerged from the tunnel and into a wide open area where the remains of a village now stood. The village appeared to be very old, with buildings not of the same era as the ones seen at Site A and C. They were in a location at the perimeter of Site B. The wording makes it hard to tell if they are still underground or not. It keeps saying that they were emerging from spots in the tunnels, but not that they had exited them. This village has strange pools of a liquefied SCP-610-like substance. The pools seem to act as if an invisible force is enacting its will on them. They move as if wind is blowing on them, etc. The team avoids these and takes notice of the buildings in the area. At the center is an old church, which they approach cautiously, leaving the buggy at a spot for an easy escape if they need it. Inside the church they find 4 pews, with one being shattered. They find this odd as the church could easily fit upwards of 20. Oddly, there is no trace of dust on any of the surfaces. Suddenly, the church bell begins to toll. The team, thinking quickly, dims their lights and hides out of the sight as a flurry of screams come from the ceiling. There is a large clump of 610 above them, but within this mass are human bodies with faces emerging from the masses. The faces are untouched by the flesh, but their bodies are covered in a red version of the flesh. They continue to scream as the church bells toll, but they're not just screaming randomly. They are actually screaming for help, as they can see the team below them. The doors of the church open and a man enters with a torch and begins lighting candles near the entrance. He lights them all and then sets light to a rope covered in 610 flesh, which leads up to a chandelier. The light covers most of the room, but does not reach the hiding place of the teams. A group of SCP-610 shamble quickly into the room as the captive humans covered in red flesh descend from the ceiling. The red flesh is devoured by the 610 entities in a rush, with increased screams from the humans. This continues for a moment before the entities all take seats in the pews, and all goes quiet as a gong sound is heard. A pillar of flesh emerges from a spot near the front pew. It remains for 10 minutes before retreating back into the ground. Only then do the 610 entities leave the building. No one moves for fear of what might happen if they do. The human captives don't even make a sound and remain at ground level. The teams finally decide it's time to leave, and that's when they are attacked by the SCP-610 entities waiting outside. Only 2 escape the assault but are quickly ended by the same figure that lit the candles. They had retreated to the buggy only to find it covered in 610 flesh. The entity swings a scythe at them, and all video feeds end. Here's where the story of SCP-610 comes to an end, as the final entry has been redacted. We do not currently have clearance to view it, so we have a cliffhanger ending. But what have we seen up to this point? Clearly the final chapter of this story was going for a Lovecraftian religious type story. The connections of the church, the flesh, the service, and the character who murders the team members with a scythe like he's the Grim Reaper. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's take it in sections. Firstly, this story started off with a zombie infection vibe. It followed that up with a mystery about the ongoings of the creatures at the site. They had formed some kind of society, one with flesh and tendrils. The Lovecraftian nature of it all became apparent as we moved forward. The giant human-faced monster was something that I wasn't expecting, but was very disturbing. The body horror reminds me a lot of John Carpenter's The Thing. The way the flesh shifted and changed, but also because of the importance of fire. We then move into the searching of the tunnels. A connection can be made by similar stories like The Descent, but I don't think that's an actual comparison. Instead, it's just a body horror-filled experience with some light touches on Lovecraftian horror. This is one of the more well-known stories and was written over 10 years ago now. The image attached to this file is what really pulled me in. The skeletal flesh-shaped monstrosities invoke a great sense of body horror. The tendrils are on display here as well. There's actually quite a bit of art for this particular entity, either because this was written long enough ago to be considered a classic in the community, or because it was popular. A lot of the depictions and art do a very good job of keeping with the gross, fleshy texture of the SCP. The biggest questions we're left with is what happened in L6 and what was that giant head? Neither of those have an answer, but likely would have been answered in the same story. From my search, the reason that L6 was considered lost is because the author of SCP-610, Neko Chris, was planning an event to wrap it up, but that never happened. There was going to be role-playing and collaborative storytelling. These insights come from a post on Reddit from 10 years ago. Interesting to note is the inspiration of the SCP. 610 was inspired by the Flood from Halo, the Mask of Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe, and the diorama art from Mark Powell. In fact, the art from the main page comes directly from Powell's collection, at least the original one did, which all showed the clear inspirations. Some of these are far more disturbing than what the story entailed. SCP-610 has been used all over the community and in a variety of ways, but no one has truly tackled what L6 could be. There have been ideas thrown around, like it discussing the location of the origin of 610. There was another one claiming that it would show an eldritch god who was the source. As of now, there is no answer. 610 will forever be a mystery, and that might be for the best. Who knows how the organization would use such a biological weapon? It could be the end of the world. Or, it could be the start of a new one. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Victor Estrada, Nora Kingsley, Meme Tendo, Scout with a Name, Miriam Reyes, Joe Gillespie, Austin Henshaw, Icy Man, Bazingle, Ryoma, Richie, Bingobo25, Master Jags, Oathian, Keely Haig, The Westbrook 33, Mads Francis, and Pystoria. Thank you all so much for supporting me. And thank you to everyone who watches my videos. I hope you all have a good night.